All right.
It
Well,
always
good
works.
evening, everyone. We are back for another edition of Daf Yomi Lamed Vav Amud Beis, two lines, or the third line from the top Gufa, the very first word on the line. And it starts off like this. Gufa, one thing that we discussed as we were progressing and we were worrying about cheese, we were worrying about wine, and we were worrying about oil, which eventually got retracted, as we learned yesterday, according to Shmuel. Rav potentially leaves some of that takana in place. Now, one of the things that we mentioned along the way was this 18 items that Beis Hillel was outvoted, and we follow Beis Shammai. And we said that because, as the Tosfos comments, what's the reason why? We talked about a little bit, one of the reasons why the rulings of Beis Shammai can't be repealed. Tosfos says that they were Moser Nefesh, that people were Moser Nefesh. They were ready to give up their lives in order to keep these enactments. These were very serious to the people. And because of that, they are never going to they're never going to be pulled away. They're always going to be in place. But here you've got these 18 items, and amongst the 18 items was Amar Bali, Amar Avimi, Nota Mishmei Derav, Piton, Ushmanon, Yenon, Uvnoseim. Amongst the list that Bali said in the name of Avimi, Nota in the name of Rav. The bread, the oil, the wine, and the daughters, Kula Mishmanasar Davar Hain, those were all prohibited by the Beis Din of Hillel and Shammai when they voted and followed Shammai's ruling. These are all of the 18. So now the question is, okay, we understand bread, we understand the oil, we understand the wine. What we don't understand is their daughters. Can't marry non-Jewish ladies, right? That's probably us or somewhere. And now the Gemara is going to want to know, what was the enactment that they made regarding the daughters of non-Jews that was part of the 18 items? Yes, Yehuda.
Same thing. Question: if you're not marry a non-Jewish girl, why is it that in time of Achashverosh, after she was able to marry Achashverosh? It
She
was
was
like
not.
intermarriage.
Right? She was not allowed to. She was
Big Gemara,
forced into
right?
it, right?
Big
It's a
Tosfos.
big conversation, big Tosfos, right? The
Sanhedrin.
Maseches Sanhedrin, big
Yeah.
Tosfos on that issue, right? About whether she was required to give up her life before committing the Avera of Gili Arayas with Achashverosh, and the Gemara discusses, the Tosfos there discusses what the permission was, but that's a great question. But she was not. The bottom line is she was not allowed, right? So that's you're not allowed.
Discussion.
So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Gazru al benoseim nidos me ariso son. The answer is that they enacted that the daughters of non-Jews are are able to transmit tuma like a nida from the time that they are babies. Now, first thing to know is that tuma of nida, right? We've had discussed what the boundaries of what is included in tuma of nida. If you are having items that are sanctified in your home, like truma, like hektish, that's a serious thing, right? You don't want to be these things can't be eaten in a state of tuma. So it's significant enough that people would create a separation between people who were tamei and people who are and these items. Okay, so when it comes to the non-Jews, though, they don't have tuma, right? They don't transmit tuma of nida at all. So even if they're an adult woman, they don't transmit tuma of nida. The Chachamim came along in order to be able to prevent the fraternalizing with the non-Jewish girls. They said that all non-Jewish women, even if it has nothing to do with nida, because it's from the time that they are babies, right? They're all going to be able to transmit tuma like a nida, so that there would be no interactions, no fraternalizing. It would help separate them. Ugniva mishmei derav amar kula mishum avodos kochavim gozru behen. And Geneva says the entire rationale behind all of this was because of Avodah Zara, right? It's all about Avodah Zara, because what's going to potentially happen is that if we wound up fraternalizing with non-Jewish ladies, then potentially the non-Jewish ladies are going to convince you to do Avodah Zara. right? And so therefore we want to avoid that. So therefore all of the fraternalizing, and so therefore that's why it's all included together, the bread, the oil, the wine. This whole problem of fraternalizing is because of Avodah Zara. Okay, so that's what they did. So Mishum Avodah Kavam Gozru, and that's why they made this Gezerah. Dichi also Rav Acha bar Ada Amar Rav Yitzchak, because when Rav Acha bar Ada said in the name of Yitzchak, he came Gozru al Piton Mishum Shmanon. So they made a takana that you can't eat their bread. Now we talked about that they can't eat their bread. We said it's going to enable fraternalization. Why? Because you might eat from their oil. My made the shemen mipas. Why is oil more powerful than bread? That we would be more concerned about their oil than their bread. The bread is because of their oil. Why is oil so much more of an issue? Ella, rather, that doesn't make sense. Ella al piton ushmanon mishum yenon. Rather, what we're saying is we don't want interactions with bread and with oil because then you might come to have a meal with them and then you'll drink their wine. Val yenon mishum binosehen. And as far as wine is concerned, wine is going to lead to interactions with their daughters. Val binosehen mishum davar acher. And their daughters is going to lead to something else. Something else is going to be Avodah Zara, which we are using the euphemism something else, right? Va'al davar acher mishum davar acher. And then we don't want them to be being involved in Avodah Zara because of something else. Now the Gemara does not describe what that second something else is. We're going to see as the Gemara progresses what that is. So now the first question that we want to know is B'nosehen de'oraisahi. The prohibition against marrying a non-Jewish lady is a Torah prohibition. Cannot marry a non-Jewish lady. The pasuk says, "Lo tischasein bam." Right? You're not allowed to marry them. This is talking about the 7 nations that were in Canaan. The Jews are not allowed to marry into them. So the answer to that, so therefore, why is it that we are worried about intermarriage with non-Jews if it's not even a Torah prohibition in the first place? The answer is deoraisa if it's Torah permission. So deoraisa zayin umos. The answer is that the Torah prohibition is against intermarrying with one of the 7 nations that are in Eretz Yisrael. But other non-Jews that worship idols, they're not prohibited by the Torah, right? And so therefore, the only reason why we can't marry them is because they may entice a person to do Avodah Zarah themselves. It's not inherently us or prohibited to marry a non-Jewish lady, mi deoraisa. The asu inhu, so therefore the rabbis came along, the gozer, and they created the enactment, and they said, afilu dishar ovdei kochavim, even the other non-Jewish ladies can't marry other non-Jewish ladies because the other non-Jewish ladies is going to lead to worshiping idols. Now, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, but according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, he says, Da'amar ki yasir es bincha me'acharai, that you're not allowed. The reason why he's doresh the reasons behind the pasuk. So we already would know why is it you can't marry into the 7 nations that are in Israel, because they're going to force you to do avodah. They're going to convince you to do avodah zarah. So then why does the pasuk have to continue on and say because they will convince you to do avodah zarah? Obviously, they're going to convince you to do avodah zarah. We got that part. Why do we have to say it again? The answer is it's extra. L'rabos kol hamesiros. It's extra to tell you that the Torah prohibition is against marrying into any lady who's going to lead you to do avodah zarah. Therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, all non-Jewish ladies are prohibited. You can't marry any non-Jewish lady if she's over avodah zarah. So then, ma'ikal meimar. So then, how are you going to explain what the rabbinic enactment is? The rabbinic enactment, we said that a Rabbanon came along and they said that you're not allowed to marry into an avodah, a woman who's not Jewish. Well, it's already prohibited from the Torah. They didn't have to make an enactment. Ella, so rather, deoraisa ishus derech chasnus. So the answer is that the Torah says you can't marry them. You can't get married, right? That's what it says. Lo tischasein bam. Don't get married to them. V'asu inhu, the rabbis came along, gazer afilu derech znus, and they said, even if it is through a promiscuous relationship, a temporary relationship, right? Those are also prohibited. That's the D'Rabbanan. So znus nami bebeis dino shel shem gazer. What are you talking about? That's not a modern enactment. The prohibition against having any relations with a non-Jew was already an enactment from Shem's based in. Shem, we're talking about the son of Noah. So Noah's son already, I'm talking about Shem, before they were Jews, there was already a prohibition against having relations with non-Jews, right? So we're basically talking about idolaters, right? A prohibition against marrying into idolaters. Siv, as the pasuk says, where do we see that? Vayomer Yehuda said, Hotzi'ua v'tisaref. About Tamar, he said, you've got to take Tamar out and she has to be burned. Now, why? Why is she being burned? The answer is because she had a limited number of Jews to choose from for her to marry, right? And she's pregnant, and it wasn't any of us. So therefore, if it's not any of us, it must have been that she had relations with somebody who wasn't Jewish. Well, if she had relations with somebody who wasn't Jewish, that's where you see the basin of shame was already enacting a death penalty, which is stronger than any takanas d'Rabbanan in modern times. They were already exacting a death penalty for anybody who married an Oved Avodah Zara back then. It was even in basically anybody who was in Avram's family, they could marry. Obviously, nobody was Jewish, right? But you had to convert in order to. I got a fly going over here. You can, in order to convert, you've got to, in order to marry somebody, they've got to convert first. You can't, right? So yes, Yehuda, if she gets burnt, she's probably going to lose the baby at the same time. That is correct, right? Ella, so rather deoraisa ove kochavim, habal bas Yisrael, demoshcha basrei. The answer that they give is, well, you know what the Torah prohibition was? That the Torah, when I say Torah, we're talking about from the times of shame, which is before the Torah was given. We're talking about a non-Jew male having relations with a Jewish woman. That was prohibited because you know she's gonna follow him, whatever his religion is. That's who they're gonna follow. Aval Yisrael al avodas kochavim. But if a Jewish man were to marry a non-Jewish lady in avodas kochavim, that would not be a problem because they're going to follow his customs and his laws, and so therefore that's not going to be a problem. The also inhu, and that's what the modern gezerah, when I say modern, right? The times of the Gemara and the Mishnah, the gezerah that they made was afilu Yisrael habal avodas kochavim. Even a Jew marrying a non-Jewish lady becomes not marrying. Sorry, a Jewish man having relations with a non-Jewish woman became prohibited from that time. So Yisrael bal avodas kochavim halacha l'Moshe Sinai. 1 second, that's not true. We have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Torah that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai that Jewish men are not allowed to have relations with non-Jewish ladies. De'amar Mar, where do we see that? Mar says haboel aramis kanoin poginbo. If somebody has relations, if a Jewish man has relations with a non-Jewish ovedes kochavim, so the zealots are going to be allowed to kill him. Now, you don't take him to Beis Din, but while he's in the act, zealots can kill him, and we know that from Pinchas, right? Because that's exactly what happened with Cosby and Zimri, and they were engaged in the act, and he was a Jewish man, she was an avodes kochavim, and Pinchas said, what's the halacha? Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They are zealots supposed to kill them, so he did. Right? So that is the halacha. So the answer is, deoraisa, the Torah prohibition was bifarhesia, was publicly. And that is the circumstance with Pinchas, right? The circumstance was that they were making a public act, and that's why he was chayav misa. Ukemaisa shahoya, just like that story in Pinchas that we're talking about. Vasu inu, the Rabbanan's enactment then is, inu gozer afilu b'tzina, they said even in private, having a Jewish man have relations with a non-Jewish lady is going to be prohibited even in private. Okay, so where are we up to, right? Just to be able to, we're about 4 lines up from the wide lines on Lamed Vav Amud Beis, and what we've described so far is that from the Torah we already know a Jewish man can't marry a non-Jewish lady, right? We already, whether they're from the 7 nations or they are from any of the other people who worship idols. We also know that the Beis Din of Shame enacted that you can't have even temporary relations. We also know that it doesn't matter whether you're a male or a female, it's going to be prohibited. And so therefore, we're still trying to figure out what it was that caused the Chachamim to come along and say, you know what, we're not allowed, we already were prohibited from all kinds of relations with a non-Jew. Why would there be a need for an enactment? Don't have some kind of enactment regarding the daughters of non-Jews when everything with the non-Jews is already prohibited. So we have come to the conclusion that it was that the enactment from that the Torah halacha Moshe Sinai was only in public. In private, then it was not prohibited, and the Chachamim came along and said in private also. So Betzina Nami, based in Shel Chashmonai Gazru. Even still, okay, we'll go forward in time a little bit. Let's get to the second Beis Hamikdash era. During the times of the Chashmonaim, the Hanukkah story of Chashmonaim, they are the ones who said that even in private you can't have relations with non-Jewish ladies. Dechi also Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came from Israel, he said, based in Shel Chashmonai Gazru, the basin of the Chashmonaim, they made the enactment that Yisrael Habav Avodas Kochavim, that a Jewish man who has relations with a non-Jewish lady, Chayev Mishum Nashga, he is in violation of the prohibitions of Nashga. And what's Nashga? Nashga is and we call it an acronym, right? It's an acronym for Nida, that there's a prohibition against a violation of having relations with a woman who's a Nida. As we said, a non-Jewish lady is not a Nida, but they established that she would have the impurity of a Nida. Shifcha, there's a prohibition against a Jewish man having a regular Jewish man having relations with a Shifcha Kananis. That's also prohibited. This woman doesn't have to be a Shifcha Kananis, but they established that prohibition as well. Gevia, Gevia is
Looks like with the Nakudos it says Goya and idolatrous.
I guess because of marrying, I think that's where we're concerned that they'll marry, which is the prohibition, which was the Torah prohibition that they're not allowed to do. And then the last one is Ashes Ish, right? That the prohibition is that potentially she's a married non-Jewish lady, right? And so if she's a married non-Jewish lady and you're having relations with her, so then you're in violation of a prohibition, even though, we're going to consider their marriage as a significant concept, and you're in violation of having relations with a married woman. So therefore, all of these, they sound like rabbinic enactments because they're not really those prohibitions, but nevertheless, we're going to say these are all applicable prohibitions that we have to create a rabbinic enactment, because then the non-Jewish lady is already close to these prohibitions. And then Ki also Rabin came, he says Nash Gaz, that it was Nida Shifcha Overes Kochavim, again the non-Jew, and the Zona. That the last prohibition is not because she's a married woman, but because you're not allowed to have relations with any Jewish woman, even when she's not married. We will have that is a Zona. You can't have relations in that circumstance either. We don't want to call her an Ashes Ish because we don't want to recognize the marriage of non-Jews because they don't really stay faithful. So therefore, we were going to consider all of the married non-Jewish ladies as Zonos. Yes, Yehuda.
All right. We know that you're not allowed to have more than one wife. But why is that kings are as an exception with kings?
Well, we don't know that, right? Halach from the Torah, you're allowed to, right? It became a rabbinic enactment that we don't, right? That is much, much later. That's not even during the times of the Gemara. That enactment is during the times of the Gaonim, later on. Right? That's a much later enactment, right? But that doesn't have to do with this, because this is talking about non-Jewish ladies. That you're talking about being married to Jewish ladies, right? This is non-Jewish ladies. So now we're still trying to figure out what enactment is left for the rabbis in the Mishnah times to enact when everything about non-Jewish ladies is already prohibited from previous basins. So the answer is Ki Gozru based in Shel Chashmonai. You know what the based in the Chashmonai based in enacted? Bia. Aval Yichud lo. They said you're not allowed to have relations, but they never prohibited you from being in private, right? Just being by yourself with a non-Jewish lady is Yichud, and that's problematic, right? We know that that's an issue when it comes to Jewish women, but why would that necessarily be a prohibition with non-Jewish ladies? Then the later based in said that's also prohibited. Right? Also inu gozer afilu yichud. So they came along and they said even being in private with a non-Jewish lady is also going to be prohibited. So still yichud nami based shel David gozer yichud, that based David HaMelech's based in established that, right? Which is interesting. David HaMelech's based in established that you cannot do yichud, which is way before the Chashmonaim's based in, where they established that you can't have relations in private. So I'm not exactly sure how that works, right? I'm going to admit that it still has me a little bit puzzled. I'm sure the Mefarshim that discuss it. The Amar of Yehuda says, "Ba'osa Shah Gazru al Yichud." What happened was the story of one of David's sons was very interested in one of David Amelech's daughters. And since David Amelech's daughter came to take care of him when he was not well, he assaulted her. And as a result of that, David Amelech said, "You're never going to be allowed to have a non-Jewish," and his daughter was from a from a marriage of what do you call it? A woman that he captured in battle. So she wasn't Jewish. So therefore, that is going to be considered to be a marriage. David Amelech said, "Okay, from now on, you're not allowed to be by yourself with a non-Jewish lady." Okay, so yichud was already prohibited. So everything is already prohibited. What's left? So then, oh, sorry, that was not, no, she was already converted. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. So you're not allowed to have, so yichud was already prohibited, but the Gemara says, so Amri Hasam yichud de Bas Yisrael. That's because the lady was Jewish, right? David's daughter was Jewish. So that's when David Amelech established the laws of yichud for Jewish women to not be allowed to be alone with a Jewish man. That is established during David Amelech's time. But there was no prohibition against being alone with a non-Jewish woman. And that's where this Beis Din comes along. They said also yichud on non-Jews as well. So yichud de Bas Yisrael Doraisi, that can't be what David's Beis Din established, because yichud for Jewish women is a Torah prohibition. That's already in the Torah. Damar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud Tzadok, Remez liyichud min Torah minayin. Where do I find a hint for the rules of yichud in the Torah? Shnamar, as the pasuk says, Ki asitcha achicha ben imecha, that when the son of your mother entices you and causes you to go to astray, the pasuk says that you could have a step brother, right? You have he's not really a step brother, he's a half brother. You have the same mother, right? Different fathers. And he is worshiping idols, and he could cause you to go astray, right? So you have to be worried about being caused to go astray. So now the question is, V'chi ben aim mesis ben of eno mesis. Why does the Torah say specifically when it picks the case, it says the son of your mother rather than the son of your father? If you have a half brother from your father, can't he also entice you to Avodah Zara? Don't you also have to be careful of that? Why does the Torah only tell us to be careful of the son of your mother? The answer is Ella ben misyached imimo ve'ein acher misyached im kol arayos shebatorah. The answer is because if this husband and wife are separated and they've married new spouses, right? And now you've got a half brother from your mother or a half brother from your father. Where is it that you are more likely to be? And the answer is you're more likely to be with your mother's household. Why? Because it's yichud to be with your father's new wife. Now, your father's new wife is an erva. She's prohibited to you. Can't be married to her. But from here we learn that all close relations other than a mother are yichud. And so therefore, if it's your stepmother, right, your father's new wife, so then you have a yichud problem. I remember I had this, there was a high school boy who realized that he was, in yeshiva, and so one day he realized, he says, my father is remarried. If my father's not home, can I be alone in the house with my stepmother? Is that a problem? I'm like, yeah, I think it is. It's a kind of an issue. So there were things that they had to do. They gave the neighbor a key and told them to come visit every once in a while. They told them when they were away or some other kinds of ways that they had to deal with it. But yeah, stepmothers are going to be problems for sons, and as are stepfathers for daughters, right? You have to worry about those kinds of things. So therefore, the Torah is telling you that there's an issue of yichud, right? Just being alone is a prohibition. That's why it's likely that who's going to be the one who entices you? The one you spend time with. Well, you're not going to spend time with your half brother from your father because you're probably not living in that household because it's complicated. But your stepbrother, your half brother from your mother's side, that's where you're going to be. So that's why you're more likely to be enticed to Avodah Zara from that circumstance, which is why the Torah picks that circumstance. But based on the Torah telling us to worry about our half brother from our mother, we deduce the idea that there's such a concept as yichud.
Amen.
Main.
So now, the answer is yichud deoraisa deishis ish. The answer is the prohibition of yichud is a prohibition from the Torah with a married woman. And that would be the circumstance when we're talking about your father's wife, right? She's a married woman. That's the prohibition now. The Asa David, the Gazer Afilu Ayichud de Pluya. David Amelech came along and said, yichud on an unmarried woman is also prohibition, right? That's where David's basing comes along and says, here's a lady, she's not an erva. There's no prohibition against her. But, right, she's not married to anybody. Still, you can't be alone with her. That's David Amelech's enactment, because that's the story that happened with his son and his daughter, that there weren't an erva to each other. Nevertheless, right, they were prohibition. Yes, Aaron. You're on mute.
Sorry. So if the Israel of Yichud is with a married woman, what's the problem with? Sorry,
the Doraisa is sir.
With the Doraisa. So what's the problem with the of the Kohavim? We don't recognize their marriage anyway.
Correct. So therefore, let's remember how this works. So that David HaMelech's based in prohibited even other Jewish ladies, and then we're saying that the based in that was during the Mishnah's time came along and they prohibited even yichud with non-Jewish ladies. So
nice.
They came along and made a further enactment. They just kept every based in that kept coming along kept making it more and more strict.
So it's
more and more worried about it.
So it's not midiraita, it's more.
It's a way later, and this we say this one with non-Jews is way later, right? It's way later, right? And that's what the Asub Talmidei Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. That's where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and their basement came along. Gazer Afilu Yichud Davoros Kavim. They're the ones who came along and they said even Yichud on non-Jews is prohibited. So therefore, that's how we have it, right? We understand that we can't marry them. We can't marry the Amim. We can't marry the other non-Jews. We can't have relations with the ones who are not married. We can't be alone with Jewish ladies. We can't have any type of relations with a non-Jewish lady. And now comes along Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and they enact the final gezerah: don't be alone with a single non-Jewish lady. And that's what the takana is. That's where we had don't eat their bread, don't drink their wine, don't eat their oil, and don't be with their daughters. And now we understand what the enactment was. Yes, Yehuda.
The reason why they don't want us to be alone with the non-Jewish women is because they may be affected. Maybe if we might have some relationships or whatever with them.
I think the issue is that they might entice us to Avodah Zara, right? As we said, because of Davar Acher. That was what they said. These prohibitions are because of Davar Acher, because they will entice to Avodah Zara. And then that Avodah Zarah will lead to Davar Acher, which we haven't described what that is.
What could not be from they may lead to some sort of illegal relationship as well?
I think that the relationship problem is less of an issue than Avodah Zarah. And the relationship problem is a takana that came from shame, right? And the problem of Avodah Zarah is midoraisa is in the Torah. So I think Avodah Zarah seems to be the bigger problem. Right, so they're worried. They're going to say the problem that we're worried about is we wouldn't make a gezerah and say that you might come to have relations with a non-Jewish lady when the relation with a non-Jewish lady is in itself a enactment that isn't in the Torah. Right, we're much more worried about she's going to say to you, "Hey, you want to hang out with me? Let's go to church." That's more what we're worried about, right? Okay, so now. My al davar acher mishum davar. Let's explain that sentence that we were worried about their daughters because of davar acher, which we said was avodah zara, and that because of something else. So, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Gozru al tinok ove kochavim shiatame beziva. Right? They made an enactment that babies from non-Jews are going to transmit tuma like a zava. Now, zava, we said, transmitted tuma for it's almost very similar to nida tuma, right? That despite the fact that we said that non-Jews don't transmit tuma normally, they enacted this as a further safeguard. Shelo yehi tinok Yisrael ragil etzlo b'mishkav zachar. Why did they decide to do that? This is the male non-Jews. We were worried that the male non-Jews will engage in homosexual relations with other Jewish boys. So therefore, because of that problem, that's why they said we're not going to allow the non-Jews to be hanging with because of Davar Achim, because of Zara, and because of something else. This is that something else. We're worried about an assault that these non-Jewish boys, they made this takana, they made this enactment that all the non-Jewish boys are going to become are going to be considered tamei, so that the Jewish boys won't be friends with them, because if they are, that's in their culture, and then that could be a potential problem. Damar Reb Zera, as Rabbi Zera said, Tsar Godol Hayo Li Eitzel Reb Asi, Rav Asi Eitzel Reb Yochanan. There was a terrible struggle that we had with between me and Rav Asi. And Rav Asi by Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan Eitzel Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Yochanan by Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Yanai Eitzel Rabbi Nassan, and Rabbi Yanai by Rabbi Nassan ben Amram, Rabbi Nachman ben Amram Eitzel Rabbi, Tinok Ove Kochavim Me'emasam Mitame Beziva. Right? Didn't know exactly what the answer to this was. At what point did we establish that the children of Ovdei Kochavim are transmitting tumah? When did they make this takana? When does it start? And when nobody knew the answer, they kept asking until they finally got back to Rabbi, and he said, Vamar li ben yomo, 1 day old, immediately. Ukishabati etzel Reb Chia, when I came to Reb Chia, Amar li, he said to me, ben tes shanim v'yom when they're 9 years old in 1 day. What's significant about 9 years old in 1 day? We learned that 9 years old in 1 day is the youngest age that a male is able to have relations. So therefore, if the issue was relations, so then by prohibiting by making the non-Jew impure when he turns 9 makes sense, right? That makes sense. Why? From when he's a baby, ukishabati v'hertzisi divrei lifnei Rebbe. So when I came and I said, here, listen, this is what I heard, and I brought it before Rabbi, Amar Li said to me, Hanach divarei v'achos divrei Rabbi Chia. He says, okay, forget what I said about the 1 day old. Go with the 9. That makes better sense. Da'amar tinok ovei kochavim emasam etame beziva. So he says that now this is the statement is now, when is it that a idolater boy becomes tamei? And the answer is ben teisha shanam v'yom echad, when he's 9 years old in 1 day. Why? Says Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph, Ho v'roi lebia, because that's when he can have relations. So therefore, mitame nami bezivo. Therefore, that's when we said time to stay away from him, and we're going to make him impure so that people will stay away from him. Amar Ravina. Ravina says Hilkach. Therefore, hatinokes. If you're talking about a girl who's ovedes kochavim, who is a idol worshiping young lady, bas gimel shanam v'yom echad, should be 3 years old in 1 day, because that is the corresponding age at which a girl is able to have relations. So therefore, at 3 years old 1 day, that's where that prohibition, that's when she becomes a zava. Ho v'ru'uya labia mitam anami beziva. So once she's able to have relations, so then she also becomes prohibited as a zava. So pshita, I mean, that's obvious. Those two things go hand in hand. Those are the ages. No, ma'uditim, but what would you have thought? It's not a matter of physical ability. It's a matter of the enticement that comes along with it. When it comes to a boy at 9 years old, he's already able to entice the Jewish boy into doing something. And that might be the reason why we're prohibiting. A 3-year-old girl is not. She's not enticing the Jewish boy to do anything. So therefore, it wouldn't make sense. But Kamash Malan, that no, we're just going to go with the same ages, the ages that the enactment was, the ages that they become appropriate for relations become the times when we consider that to be a zava, and they are not going to be allowed. That way they'll separate from hanging out with the Jewish boys. Okay, now, next thing. Mistemich ve'ozil. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah akasvei derbi simlo sham'eh. So, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, who's the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it's not the same person. This is Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. That's why we said that line of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi removed the takana is going to be should be taken out of the Mishnah, because you see, it's really Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya who rescinds the enactment of oil, and he's the grandson of Rabbi. So by the time the Mishnah, the enactment would have still been in place. So he was leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Simloi, who was his assistant. Amar le Simloi lo yisa emesh bebeis hamedrash keshi tarnu es hashemen. You weren't with us in the base medrash yesterday when we voted and we permitted the oil from non-Jews, right? That was when the enactment was officially repealed. Amar lo biyamenu tatir af esapas. He says, you know what? Once we're already undoing enactments, let's get rid of the bread. Let's get rid of that one as well. So Amar lo, he said, Im Kain, if I were to do that, koruli based in Sharia, they would call me a based-in that is permitting too many things, right? They would make comments about my based-in that, and then they wouldn't be trusted. So I can't let unlimited, I can't just. Now, by the way, as we mentioned, there's one of the 18 things that are from Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and it's clear that oil was able to be rescinded because they didn't take it on. I wonder, therefore, that the reason why Rabbi Simlai was able to say to Rabbi Yehuda, let's get rid of bread also, is that it also was not universally taken on. And that makes some sense, which is why the halacha is nowadays that we consider pas Yisrael a chumrah more than it is a halacha, right? It's a stringency that we take more than it is halachically obligated, like Chalav Yisrael is more so than pas Yisrael. Okay, so therefore, so I'm supposing. Ditnan is in the Mishnah. Hey, Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer, ish Treda. Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer, the man from Treda, he testified, al ayil kamsa dochan. He testified about the grasshopper called the ayil kamsa, right? It's similar to in some sort of way to a ram. I don't know. I guess it had horns of some sort, like a ram. So it was some kind of grasshopper. He said, that's a kosher grasshopper. That was the first thing he said. The second thing he said is the liquid from the place of the slaughterhouse, which we'll describe and see what that is later on in the Gemara. But the slaughtering place in the Beis Hamikdash was to the north side of the Mizbeach. They had rings there to be able to hold the animals down when they would do their slaughtering. And so that was the place where all of the slaughtering took place. Any liquids, normally tuma, impurity, can transfer from water and blood onto something else, and they didn't. We're going to see that the transfer of tuma didn't occur in that area. We'll discuss that. Yes, Yehuda.
When he said grasshopper, was he referring to locust, or actual grasshopper
Locusts.
itself?
I guess locusts and grasshoppers are similar. Not quite sure. Right. All I know is that my daughter had a very large grasshopper in her house this morning, and it was gross. It was gross. And she called me over since I was in Baltimore. I was able to help out, and I got rid of the grasshopper. So they could be. They do not. They had zero appeal. I was not interested at all in the grasshopper. So this grasshopper must be very tasty. So in any event, very different, right? She didn't inform me because she used Google on her phone. It was a camel grasshopper. So it was not a ram grasshopper. So maybe it's very different. Now, Va'al diyakriv lemisa masav. And the third thing they said is if you touch somebody who's tameh, a body, somebody touches tuma, a body is tameh. Now, at the answer, Vikarule, Yosef Sharia, they called him Yosef the Permitter, right? They were speaking bad about his based-in by saying they're so lenient, that based-in. Now, first of all, we're going to want to know, the last thing doesn't sound like a permissible thing. It sounds like it's a prohibiting thing, right? The last thing they said is that touching a corpse body is tummy. That sounds like a strictness. But we're going to see how that's really a leniency later on. So we'll hang on to that. We probably won't get into it today. We'll probably have to hang out for that cliffhanger for Sunday to be able to understand what that is. But here's the point. There are 3 leniencies that they did, and 3 leniencies led to being called a permitting based-in. Amar Le, so he said, Hasam Sharat Tlos. He says, but that was 3 things. Umar Sharachad, you've only done 1. You've got 1 left. Right? It's like the genie in the lamp, right? You've got 3 wishes. You've only used 1. You've got, use your second one. The ishari mar chada achrisi akasi tartinu. Even if you add a second leniency on and you get rid of the bread, then you still have 1 to go before they call you overly lenient. Dahavya tartin hu dahavya. It would only be 2. So Amar Lei, so he says, Ana Shar'ai Achrisi. He says, I've already permitted one other thing too. He says, there's another thing I already took care of. So I permitted the oil, something else, I can't do a third one. So Maihi, what was the other one that he permitted? Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah. Im lobasi mikan ad shnei masar chodesh. Let's say a person says to his wife, right? He's going off someplace dangerous. And he doesn't want to leave her to be an aguna, right? He doesn't want her. So what he does is he writes a get and he says, if I don't come back in 12 months, this is your get. You're divorced, so that way you're allowed to remarry. That's what he decides. That's what he says. Now, umeis betok shnei masar chodesh. So he dies during the 12 months. So, no get. It's not a get. Why? Because he said, if I don't come back after 12 months, then this is a get. Well, he's already dead. You can't give a get after you're dead. So, if he was alive somewhere and he didn't return, so then it's a get because he's alive. That's his get. But if we know he's dead, then the get is ineffective because it can't take place after he dies. Make sense? Okay, good.
So she's just a widow then, basically. Is that
So she is actually got. Well, we're gonna say ain't no get. We're gonna see that it actually winds up becoming a doubtful situation. If I understand the Mefarshim properly, we're gonna consider it not a get out of doubt, and because of the doubt, she can't marry and she can't. She's not a widow. I guess she's able to remarry either way, right? Because either she's divorced or she's a widow, right? Being able to marry isn't the issue. The issue is going to be, what about chalitza, right? Do you have to worry if she does no children? Does the brother have to do yibum or chalitza, right? That's going to be the issue. And so we would probably have to do chalitza out of a suffix in order to prevent that from being the issue so that she'd be allowed to marry anybody else. But she would not be allowed to do yibum. Because that's something you would be allowed to do yibum.
But if it's a false assumption and she married someone else.
Oh, so now you ask the question: what if she went and she married somebody else? Does she have to get divorced? And so that is subject to lots of discussion in other Gemaras in the Kedushin area and things. That if she has some understanding whether we have to force her to be divorced based on the fact that she didn't do sufficient research or not. It's a good conversation, but probably too much for now. Have to wait about 5 more years till we get around to Mases. Yevamos, you say? Ellie says Yevamos. So I trust him. He knows it better than me. So I taught it, but it doesn't matter. Okay, now Vitani Allah. Now we learned about it for Rabosenu. Hitirua linase. That the Chachamim came along and they said, nope, she's allowed to be remarried with that get. So now Vamrinon, we asked a fine question. Man Rabosenu, who are these rabbis that permitted her to remarry with this get? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda and Shmuel, Beis Dina, Desharu Mashcha, it's the same Beis Din that permitted the oil. They were at it again. This Beis Din, that's the second time. So they were permitting this get. They said it was okay, and they said the same thing about the oil. Savri lo Rabbi Yossi. Where did they get this from? They got it from something that Rabbi Yossi said. To Amar, he said, Zmano shel shtar mochiach olav. The date on a contract proves that the initial date is in that contract for a significant purpose. If the person, we have to think about if the person meant that his divorce should take place after he died, then why did he date the contract the day that he left? It must be, the way we're supposed to interpret this divorce contract is that his not coming back is a condition. He's not saying that when I don't come back after 12 months, you're divorced. And after 12 months, he's already dead. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that as of today, I am making a condition. This is the day of your divorce if I don't come back after 12 months. If it's a condition, then it's a valid get because the condition is fulfilled. He didn't come back after 12 months. Therefore, your get is retroactive to the day he left when he certainly was alive. This is based on something Rabbi Yossi said, and this is where this based in of Rabbi Yehuda Nisiya came along and said, therefore, this get, with using this, we understand that these gittin are permissible. Rav Abba braid Rav Chia bar Abba, and Rav Abba, the son of Rav Chia bar Abba, said, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi hora velo hodulo kol shato. So he says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he taught this halacha, which I guess was his grandfather, right? And they never accepted it during his entire lifetime. right? So
They have a grandson.
the Chachamim never except until his grandson came along and he was successful at it. The Amri law kol siyato. Some explain that it wasn't all the time that he tried to do it and nobody ever accepted it, but it was all of the other members of his Beis Din didn't go along with him. So he wasn't able to do it, but his grandson was able to pull it off. Amar Rebbe is the change to Elazar. Usually that's what
That's
happens.
a
Here.
Loiterman.
It's Elazar. So Amar Rebbe Elazar, Amar Le Rebbe Elazar, Lehahu Saba. So a certain Rebbe Elazar said to a certain elderly fellow, Kishiri Suha le'alter shiri suha delo asi. Now that we say she's permitted to marry, once we know he's dead, we know he's not coming back after 12 months. Is she allowed to marry immediately, or do we have to wait the 12 months until the contract, until now it's not fulfilled, and now retroactively she's divorced, right? What's the answer there? Daha ikayim le tanoi, because then the condition is fulfilled, right? Do we have to wait the 12 months? But tiboiloch amas nisin, and you can ask this question. Why did you ask this question of this of here? Why did you ask this on the Mishnah? Because the Tanan, the Mishnah says, Hareze gitech me'achshav imlo basi mikan ad shnei masar chodesh. The Torah, the Mishnah says, right? If somebody says this is your divorce contract from now, if I don't come before until 12, now this one is very clear. The language in the Mishnah is clear. He says, Mikan, your divorce is from today. The case that we were using was he just wrote the date. And he didn't specify it's officially from today. And the leniency that we came along with is just writing the date is sufficient to consider it as though he said from today. But in this, he's saying that your divorce is from today if I don't come back in 12 months. Umeis betok shnei masar chodesh, and he dies within 12 months. Have a get. It is a get. Why? Deha ikayim late tonight, because the condition is fulfilled. Now, v'tiboilach, you should have asked the question on the Mishnah, the question you just asked me. Le'alter havigita, is it immediately a get? Deholo also, because we know he's not coming. O dilma liachar yud beis chodesh hudi kayim le'tana'eh, or do we have to wait until the 12 months pass, and then the condition is fulfilled, and then retroactively it's a get? So in Achinami, he says, you're right. I could have asked it. That works. I could have asked on the Mishnah. Elamishum dehavis ba'u min yona. I just figured that since you were in the Beis Din, that's why I asked you a question about what the Beis Din said. I figured I'd ask you the question that related to you. Fair question, right? And the Gemara doesn't seem to answer that. But nevertheless, it's a fair question, right? And they could have asked it on the Mishnah, but he asked it to the person who was on that Beis Din. Amar Abaye says, Hakom modim lekishetetze chama minartika. Let's say a person says, well, I'm divorced if the sun rises tomorrow, right? That's his comment. So lechinafka kamarle. Everyone agrees that in that circumstance, the divorce takes place when the sun rises. Vechimayis belelia, and therefore, if he dies during the night, get le'achamisahu. That is a get which takes place after his death, because he said the get is going to take place when the sun rises, and therefore he died before the get, so therefore it's not a get. But if he also said the other way, if you're divorced on condition that the sun rises tomorrow, then me'achshav kamarla. He's saying then you're divorced right now if the sun rises tomorrow. The chimayis belelia, and therefore if he dies overnight, havadei tana have, then that's for sure fulfilling the condition, and she's divorced. The get mechayimhu, because it's a get while he was alive, because it takes place since he said mikan, from right now, when I'm writing the get the day before, then that is a get. Kid Rav Huna, like Rav Huna said, Damar Rav Huna says, Kol ha'omer al minas, komer me'afshav dami. Anybody who puts in their contract on condition that they mean that the condition is effective to right now, right? I'm saying this is your gift if, you do 100 jumping jacks. Okay, so what point is the gift yours? When you do the 100 jumping jacks? No. From the time I said on condition that this is your gift right now, on condition that you fulfill the condition. So when you fulfill the condition, the get is retroactive to the original time. Lo nechlaku, the argument that exists is ella be'im teitze. If he says if, right? If he doesn't specify, he didn't say your get is on condition that, And he didn't specify, he didn't say, and that would everybody would agree would be from now. He didn't say your get is after when this happens, because then that wouldn't be a get. The issue that we're dealing with here is only in a circumstance where we said if, because if could mean two things. If could mean that I'm giving it to you if you do this, meaning on condition, or if this happens at that point, that will be the result. So if could go both ways. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Savarla Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who wanted to allow this to take place, so he held like Rabbi Yossi. He says that's the reason why we put a date in the contract in the first place. It indicates that he meant from right now. Right? He's saying that the divorce is from right now when I die, if I fulfill the condition when I die. It's like from now we may see, right? That's the same thing. For Rabbanon, the Rabbanon leis lehu de Rabbi Yossi. They don't hold like Rabbi Yossi. V'havalei kezegitech im mesi. They're like saying, this is your get if I die. Meaning, at the moment that I die, this is your get. But that doesn't work. And that's greda. That is a non-compliant get. And that's why the Chachamim were arguing with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi on it. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was not able to push it through. Till Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is based in. Yes. That's the Rabbanan are going to say you must specify me'amshav. That's or almanas. Almanas also works, right? Gufa. Okay. On this point, we say, hey, Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzreda. Yossi ben Yoezer, the man from Tzreda, said, Al ayil kam. So let's go over these things that they permitted. Okay. We know that he didn't want to do bread because he already permitted two things. We then went through what the two things are. Now let's go back to the situation that happened with Yosef Sharia, Yosef the permitter. What were the three things that he permitted? Number one, the gram grasshopper. They said was dochan. That's kosher. It says kosher. V'amashke be mat bechaya dochan. He said the liquids in the slaughter area of the Beis Hamikdash, those are kosher. Those are pure. They don't transmit tumah. Val yakriv lemisa. If somebody comes close to or touches a body, masev, he becomes tamei. The karule Yosef Sharia. They called him Yosef Sharia, the Yosef the permitter. So my ayol kamsa. What is this ram grasshopper? What are we talking about here? Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa says Shoshiba. It's the Shoshiba grasshopper. And Rabbi Chia Bar Ami Mishmei Deula Amar Sosbil. He said it was the Sosbil grasshopper. Rav Papa Amar Shoshiba, the Kamifligi Birosho Aruch. Rav Papa explains that it was the Shoshiba grasshopper. They're arguing about the long head of this grasshopper. The Torah tells us there are four types of grasshoppers that are kosher. And what we learn is that any grasshopper that has the characteristics, all of the characteristics of all of these grasshoppers, then that grasshopper is kosher. One of the things that these grasshoppers, all four of these grasshoppers do not have is a long head, right? They do not have, all of them have short heads. So what happens is this grasshopper says that this grasshopper, the Shoshiba, is a long-headed grasshopper. So therefore, the question was, is that one of the things that we have to worry about when we're talking about kosher grasshoppers, or is it not, right? Clearly, none of the other grasshoppers have long heads, but it's just a question of whether long head makes a difference or not. So the Shoshiba is an otherwise kosher-looking grasshopper, but it has a long head. So that's why they had an argument about the Shoshiba. Okay, so then, Mar Sava Rosha Orach Aser. One says that if it has a long head, it's going to be prohibited. Umar Sava Rosha Orach Mutter. The other one says a long head is going to be permissible. Rabbi Chia Bar Ami Mishmei Deula Amar. Rabbi Chia Bar Ami said in Ula. He says Sospil Berosho Orach Kuliyam Lopligi. He says the Sospil, right? It's the Sospil that we're talking about. Long heads. For sure, nobody has a disagreement. That's for sure not included. That's not a kosher grasshopper. The Shoshiba, nobody would have assumed would be okay because its head is long and none of the other grasshoppers have long heads. That for sure is not kosher. The argument is Kuli Amalo Pligi Doser. V'hacha, the issue here is Beknaf of Chofen es Rubo Ayaded Drak Miflagi. All kosher grasshoppers have wings that cover the majority of their bodies. Now, the Sospil also has wings that cover the majority of their bodies, but just barely. And so therefore the question is, do you have to have a grasshopper that's wings cover its body in an obvious way? Or is it enough that it covers most of its body, even if it's not so obvious? So Mar Savaruba called who? One opinion says all you need is to cover the majority of the body at all, right? Doesn't have to be a significant majority. Just a majority is enough. That's what the siman is of the grasshoppers. Therefore, this one is kosher. And Umar Savar Ruba de Min Karboyin, we need to have a very recognizable majority of the body covered. Can't be just so. It has to be a significant majority of the body covered. And therefore, the Sosbiel grasshopper is not kosher. Go a little bit further. We said that the liquid that was in the slaughter area of the Beis Hamikdash is pure. My dachan, what does it mean that it's pure? What does that mean? It's pure. Does it mean it's kosher to eat, like we said by the grasshopper? Rav Amar Dachan Mamish. Rav says it means it's really pure. It's pure, meaning that even if tuma, something is tamei, touches that blood or that water, it does not become tamei. Ushmuel Amar Shmuel says Dachan Mila Tamei Acher. No, that's not what it means. It means that while if that blood or that water itself touches something that's tamei, it can't transfer that tuma to the next level, to another food item, right? If a liquid touches a food item, so then it can transfer that liquid, can become a rishon tuma, and transfer that food that to a secondary. With secondary level tuma is very important because in the Beis Hamikdash you have kodshim, which is even fourth level tuma you can even transfer to. So therefore, the question isn't whether the blood or the water itself is tamei. The question is whether it transmits that tuma to something else. So about tumas atman yesh bahen, but they are themselves tamei. If they touch something that's tamei, they are tamei themselves. Rav Amar Dachan Mamish. Rav says no, it's really pure. There's no tuma about it at all. Kasavar tumas mashkin derabanan. He holds that liquids becoming tamei in the first place is completely rabbinic. There's nothing in the Torah that says liquids can become tamei. The chigazer rabbanon tuma b'mashkin dialma. When the rabbis made this enactment about liquids, because they wanted to prevent people from transmitting tuma, so they said liquids are going to transmit tuma. They said that every place except the Beis Hamikdash. They didn't make it in the Beis Hamikdash because they did not want things to be tamei in the Beis Hamikdash. They want to avoid tuma in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, they made their enactment outside the Beis Hamikdash, has nothing to do with inside the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, all those liquids, the blood and the water in the Beis Hamikdash, cannot become tamei. Shmuel says Dachan milatame acherim. No, it means that it cannot transmit tuma to the next level because of al tumas asman, but tuma for itself yesh bahen, it can be tamei itself because kasavar tumas mashkin de oraisa latame acherim duraban. And he says that tumas mashkin, liquid tuma, is something that exists by liquids from the Torah, and it's only transferring it to the next level that's rabbinic. Therefore, the rabbi's enactment of transmitting tuma from liquids back to other food items, that's only rabbinic. They made that established outside of the Beis Hamikdash because they wanted to be able to make sure people were careful with tuma. But they never made that enactment inside the Beis Hamikdash where tuma would really cause problems. So therefore, that's what they came along. They say they came along. They pronounced that this liquid in the slaughtering area of the Beis Hamikdash is completely is pure, meaning pure that it can't transmit too much to something else, or that it can't become tamei itself. So that's 2 out of 3. We will continue on Sunday with the last item, the thing that was puzzling, that they said that if you touch a corpse, you become tamei, which sounds like a stringency, not a leniency, and also it sounds like something that's written right in the Torah. So what's going on?
Which is Yakriv, right?
At the two ad Yakriv Lamisa. Those 2 that's where we are going to pick up from on Sunday.
Beautiful.
Aaron, what did he just do? What did he do this time?
Sorry?
Aaron. I'm talking to Aaron. What did you do this time? I got the notification.
You have to something again? Yeah, he is. He is. Aaron's we're really enjoying this Zoom. That's for sure. That's for sure. Wonderful. Yasher Koya, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Loiterman. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
We're going to miss you.
Yep.
Koya, thank you.
Oh, make sure that they know I'm not leaning on Shabbos.
Yeah,
we got
a sub. We got a sub.
Okay, good.
Are the twins with you? Are the twins with you?
The twins are with me, yes. So they're not leaning either.
No.
Send them my regards.
Okay, I will.
They haven't figured out how to Zoom on Shabbos.
Exactly.
We'll find a basin that permits it. We'll see. Or Yehuda will see how we'll call